Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our latest CyCast, and our next guest really needs no introduction, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. Sage Rosenfels ranks as one of the greatest quarterbacks in Iowa State history. A two-year starter, Rosenfels and a group of guys who believed in head coach Dan McCarney's vision changed the course of Cyclone history by breaking through in 2000. With Sage under center, the Cyclones won the school's first bowl game ever and ended the season with a school record 9 victories. The Insight.com offensive MVP used his success as a Cyclone into a solid 11-year NFL career where he started 12 games at quarterback. He's remained in the public eye as a football analyst, a public speaker, and a podcaster, and he continues to be a staunch supporter of Iowa State athletics. Welcome to the show, Sage. Great to have you.
Mike Green, also known as the Great Beaner. Thanks for having me.
Well, this is going to be a fun one, and obviously, you've been around now. I can't believe it's 25 years since you. Next year will be 25 years since you left school. It doesn't make sense that it's been that long, but it's coming up. But I guess the first question I want to ask you, Sage. Growing up on the eastern side of the state, in a town called Maquoketa. Did you even know much about Iowa State athletics, or was everything just basically Hawkeye where you grew up?
Well, it was all Hawkeyes, and you have to really go back to how it was back then, and in particular how it was in my household. We had a small 12-inch black and white TV that at some point turned into a 19-inch color TV, but within that, we didn't have cable. We didn't get Fox or anything. We had ABC, NBC, CBS, and PBS. And we didn't watch a lot of TV. I grew up on 10 acres in the country. We, were outside all the time. We were gardening, we're this, we're that. We had chickens, but I had 2 older brothers who loved sports, in particular my oldest brother. And so he sort of set the stage for what I was going to do as a kid, which is play sports with him all the time. And so that's what we did. In Eastern Iowa at that time, it was all Hawkeyes. And, the only people that I feel like I knew that were Cyclone fans were some of my friends' dads who were farmers, excuse me, from Eastern Iowa. And you'd see an occasional Iowa State hat or something, but it felt so far removed. Ames, Iowa was so far removed from where I was from, Maquoketa, that it wasn't really part of my radar. My dad was from Chicago, so anytime we went to a big city, we didn't go to Des Moines. We went east. We went to Chicago, and so we didn't really go much west of Cedar Rapids or Iowa City for sports or for anything. State basketball tournament, state wrestling tournament, come out to Des Moines, but that was about it. First time I was ever named was I believe my either my sophomore or my junior year. I went there for a Rolling Stones concert, the Voodoo Lounge tour with my parents. And that was the first time I was ever in what is now Jack Trice Stadium.
1994, I think it was.
1994, yeah. So I think that was my junior year in the fall. That was my first time to ever be, I guess, named. I was just at the football stadium. I think it was called Cyclone Stadium at the time, not even really sure.
Yeah, it was.
And so that was it. It was this artificial turf, pretty simple stadium. I'd been in Kinnick a few times. I had some kids, some friends I grew up with who had season tickets with the Hawkeyes, and so I'd grown up going to some games, and in particular in that northeast end zone, was where the recruits used to sit, and that's where my good friends' parents' season tickets were. And so I think I went to 2 games growing up there. Jumping ahead full circle, I scored a touchdown there to sort of secure our win my senior year. And so that northeast corner of Kinnick Stadium has a special spot in my heart. So I grew up very much a Hawkeye fan, and it's just interesting how Dan McCarney came into Iowa State, and at the same time, Iowa was still very good, but 3 or 4 years later, the programs had really changed paths, and with McCarney on the rise and old Hayden Fry at the end of his career, the first 2 years of Kirk Ferentz were pretty unsuccessful. And so, I like to think that the guys that I was with on our recruiting trips and our freshman class sort of helped make that change from the Cyclones being the more dominant team in the state, where the Hawkeyes had run the roost for decades.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that your brothers were really, influential in your career as getting into sports, but your high school career is fascinating to me, and I don't know if a lot of people even know this, but you were all state in football, basketball, baseball, and tennis, and also kicked extra points and field goals for your high school team. I'm just guessing, Sage, that you are a big, strong proponent of kids playing multiple sports.
I hate the way the sports world is nowadays. I really do dislike it. I understand that. I mean, if I would have just sort of played football and or basketball, I probably would have had a higher skill level in a lot of ways. I probably would have had a technique coach to teach me how to throw the football better, those things. But there's something about being a multi-sport athlete that I think is really, really important for the development of the whole person and the whole athlete. And yeah, it was, football in the fall, basketball in the winter, which was really probably my favorite sport at the time. I feel like if I played that now, I'd probably tear an Achilles or something. Springtime, I played tennis. My dad was from the north suburbs of Chicago, so he grew up playing tennis and golf and a little bit of basketball. And then summertime, we played baseball. Now, my senior year, after I had committed to come to Iowa State and signed, I went out for track and tennis at the same time in the spring.
That's right.
I knew that I was going to have to get used to running. I never liked running, but I knew I was going to have to sort of train myself to get, because I knew we were going to do a lot of running at Iowa State, and I wanted to get faster as well. And so I went out for both at the same time, which is interesting. You pretty much just go to meets at that point, and you're not even really doing much practice in either sport, and you're just going from one meet to another, sometimes both in the same night, try to catch the 4x4 at the end or something of a meet that might be a half an hour away.
Yeah.
But so I ended up sort of going for 5 sports my senior year. I was my brother was the punter and the kicker, so I became the punter and the kicker as well. Very, very different world, not specialized in any way. Sort of, what can I do to help the team? We needed a kicker, so I just taught myself how to kick. My sophomore year, I hurt my arm. I broke my arm in a game, so I was out for like the last 5 games of the year. So I just taught myself how to kick, and I ended up being the kicker for the next couple years. And so very different than today's age, and I do think that was important for me for my personal all-around development, and I think it helped me at Iowa State. Because when you're just on the football team, football players are a sort of a certain breed of athletes in person, though there's a wide variety in football. But you definitely don't have like tennis player mentality in football, right? And then so tennis players are a lot of times different kids in the school that would never go out for football.
Yep.
And it was important for me to be around the tennis kids. Same with basketball, same with baseball. That variety, I think, really helped with, I guess, I'd like to think that it helped me make me a fairly well-rounded person. I, as a parent, I firmly believe in exposure as much as I can. And when you just play one sport all year long, I feel like you're not really exposed to much more than that sport and those people and that one coach or 2 coaches. And when you play multiple sports, just that exposure. Now the best I can do with my kids is try to get them to travel around and go to other places and go to unusual restaurants and be exposed to different things. It's because everything is so individualized. And my daughter pretty much just does dance, and my other daughter pretty much did soccer, and my son basically played tennis and golf and basketball when he was young. So I tried my best to do the multi-sport thing, but as the sort of systems go, my kids end up being, for the most part, single sport athletes as well.
Yeah. Well, how hard was it for you to narrow down a sport to play in college? I'm assuming you were getting offers from multiple schools at all these different sports. How hard was that for you?
It was pretty easy, actually. I played so much basketball growing up. My high school coach was basically the Bob Knight of Iowa high school basketball.
Mr. Fleming.
Bill Fleming. In a lot of ways, he was extremely hard. We, defense and and we worked 12 months out of the year on basketball. You know, football season was pretty much the only time I didn't play basketball. I felt like, you know, even during the spring or the summertime, I was playing basketball. So when we were driving to Iowa State on my recruiting trip, we had this conversation with my parents. I had this conversation with my parents about, you know, what if they offer me a scholarship? And we sort of weighed all the positives and negatives, and we thought, well, I've spent so much time on basketball. I've spent a ton of time on baseball. I'm not that I'm like capped out, but you know, at the end of the day, I'm 6'4", and I was a pretty good shooter, and a little this and a little that. But I knew that the difference between a good high school basketball player and a Division I basketball player is huge. It's a whole different ball of wax, and so I wasn't going to get a Division I scholarship. If my best bet would have been playing at like Northern Iowa or maybe a smaller school. And so when we thought if I could play a Power 5 football, and we thought that I had, you know, big potential in football. It was sort of untapped. You know, I'd gone to maybe 1 or 2 football camps in high school, didn't have any sort of throwing technique. We ran the veer, which is like an option offense in high school. And so we sort of felt that football had the most potential. You know, hey, I'm 6'4", I'm 190 pounds. I can throw the ball pretty well because of baseball, and I'm athletic because of basketball. You put that together and spend 3 or 4 years on that and really work on it with good coaching, that could develop into, you know, maybe a pro level quarterback. And that's actually what happened.
And I'm assuming Coach Woodley, Mike Woodley, was your lead recruiter. And, you know, when he was recruiting you, he obviously had to sell what he saw in you to Coach McCarney, because obviously, I mean, your stats, like you said, you weren't attending all these camps and all this stuff that all these other guys are doing. You're kind of under the radar. But obviously, Coach Woodley saw something in you and, you know, went back to Coach McCarney and said, we got to take a chance on this guy. He's athletic. He's played a ton of sports. He may not have a great experience in football. But how much did Coach Woodley have an impact in your career in coming to Iowa State?
Absolutely huge. You know, before Mike Woodley was at West Des Moines Valley, he was at St. Ambrose, which is over in Davenport. And so I grew up sort of playing against his sons in high school. So, you know, a lot of times you have these families that have 2 or 3 athletes in the same family. So you sort of hear these names. And of course, from Maquoketa, you hear about the Woodley name down in the Quad Cities, and how all 3 sons were really good athletes. And so I competed in basketball and baseball against Matt, the oldest of the 3 brothers. And I think Mike Woodley changed my life when he convinced Dan McCarney to give me a scholarship. And on top of it, we went to a 7-on-7 camp at Iowa State right before my senior year. We didn't know what 7-on-7 was. Dan McCarney put on sort of the first ever Iowa State 7-on-7 passing, not a camp, a tournament. And so, you know, we show up, drive in from Eastern Iowa, and we don't know what 7-on-7 is. Like, we know there's no linemen, but, you know, there's 5 linemen, and they're talking about 7-on-7. Well, that's 12, you know. So, like, who gets to play, and what's the, you know, what are the rules here? We had no idea. And we're still running our offense that's like bootlegs, and we don't have like drop back passes. You know, that was our style of offense. And so I just went out there and just competed my tail off with my you know, high school friends against all these kids from all over. And it was just like you know, sandlot football, you know. And you know, I guess I you know, if you ask Coach Mack, he will say that 7-on-7 tournament, when they saw me out there competing, that they had a pretty good feeling, you know, about me. So I think that with Mike Woodley and that 7-on-7 tournament, those were the 2 biggest reasons why I got a scholarship to Iowa State.
You know, speaking of Coach McCarney, you know, obviously at that time, you know, Iowa State football had not been very good in a long time. And Coach McCarney was very early in his career when he offered you the scholarship. When you think about that man and his vision, when you first met him, was it just basically instant, like, I need to play for this guy? Was it something like that? Or because he has a gift, as you know, of making people believe And then once these athletes would get there, holding accountability that they're going to work hard and get better.
Well, I got offered a scholarship right before Christmas. So they had gone through their first year. My first ever recruiting letter, I'm seeing an Algebra 2 class, and I open up an Iowa State recruiting letter, and Dan had just taken the job. It was, January, February, I guess early 1995. He goes in that first season. I think they go 3-8 in that first season, and then I get offered a scholarship, leaving a basketball tournament, driving to Ames, and getting that scholarship offer. So I'd never really been around. I had been to the Iowa football camp, and I sort of saw how Hayden Fry was, and I'd been to that 7-on-7 tournament. I had seen what Dan McCarney was like. I'd seen some other college coaches, but I wasn't like heavily recruited by any means. And so hearing Coach Mack speak for the first time, and sort of how he was, how he still is, if he doesn't move you by his words, you may not have a heartbeat, or you struggle with some sort of emotional, something, because the way he is and the way he speaks and sort of the truisms that he talks in, they have a huge impact on not only the student athletes like myself, but like our parents. And, as a high school junior, senior, you're shipping your kids off to some other person that they are basically, sort of turn into a parent. They're responsible for their child. And so for my parents, and, in the world of college athletics, it can be very, very greasy and, not always great. And for my parents, I think it was very, very reassuring that this guy was going to be sort of in charge of the program and was in charge of what was going to occur with their son. And so we knew that the whole team had a work cut out for us. And we knew how far the Nebraskas of the world at the time, Colorado in the conference, the Oklahoma, how far they were ahead of Iowa State from their facilities, from their history, from the players on their roster, their ability to recruit. Iowa State and Iowa, if Iowa wanted a player, about 95% of the time they got that player. And McCarney would talk about that for a while. Iowa State didn't even recruit. If Iowa recruited somebody, Iowa State just backed off.
Absolutely.
They were truly like the second school in the state, and they basically stopped competing with the Hawkeyes. And Mac wasn't gonna stand back to anybody, and so you have a lot of players in my class that could have gone to Iowa, but there was something convincing, obviously very persuasive about Dan McCarney's vision at Iowa State. And he sold hope.
He did.
He sold old-fashioned grit, and this is how we're going to get it done. And we're going to get it done with guys who are extremely hardworking, and guys who never give up, and guys who believe. And it took a long time, and there was a lot of times when it was really easy to think this is never going to happen. My redshirt freshman year, we won one game. And in our 11 games that year, I would say half of them were even competitive. I would say half the games were over at halftime. I mean, it was truly sort of an uncompetitive team. And, it just sort of shows how before Mac was there, those bad recruiting classes or poor recruiting classes, they have to sort of play themselves out. And so, my redshirt freshman year, we might have had 5 or 6 seniors on that team. So many guys had quit. And so we're just so thin, and we're playing redshirt freshmen and redshirt sophomores starting when we really should be in the development mode of being college football players. And so, lots of moments where you think to yourself, this is not going to happen. Like, there's just no way for us to inch our way up to compete with the major schools in this conference. Nebraska was winning national championships and just dominant and sending 6-7 players to the NFL every year. And we didn't have that type of talent. And so, but we kept believing. And the way Dan McCarney just was, he didn't allow you to stop believing. Just, as soon as you're like, we're not even competitive in that football game, he'd come in on Monday and, hey, I think we can win this week. Hey, we got beat by 60 last week, but I'll tell you what, we can win this week, and it starts today. It starts with this meeting, it starts with this practice, it starts with this lifting session. And so his never-ending commitment and his never-ending selling of hope to us players was everything, because if he doesn't do that, I don't know how we turn the program around.
Yeah. Well, your first 3 years, Sage, was basically you developing. You redshirted your first year. Your next 2 years, you sat behind Todd Bandauer as the quarterback. How much did Todd, or I guess I should say Bandy, how much did Bandy help you in your development those early years when you weren't really on the field?
Yeah. Well, Bandy was, when he was from Florida, and he had, grown up going to like the Florida State or Florida, camps, and he knew about throwing fundamentals and baseball throwing fundamentals and these things that I knew nothing about. So I definitely learned a lot from him of, how to throw a football. Of course, Bandy's really smart, mechanical engineer, and he was a hard worker. But we were designed differently. I was more athletic and he was a better thrower.
Yep. So
I knew my game wasn't going to be the same necessary, as his game. And so, yeah, I think he was very helpful. I never felt like I was competing with Todd. I very much sort of knew my role from the get-go. When I first got to Iowa State, I was a 4th-string quarterback. I was the 2nd quarterback in my class. My first year, I'm the 4th quarterback, and a kid named Mitch Ryerson was the 3rd quarterback, and then Todd Doxson, who actually lives near me in Omaha now. And so I'm the 4th-string quarterback, and my goal was just to hopefully start my senior year. I thought if I can work really, really hard for the next 4 years, I'll develop physically, mentally, I'll understand the game better. And if I can start my senior year, maybe after that I could get a job in Des Moines, because people might know my name a little bit. That's real. That's really what that was my mindset. It wasn't like I'm going to beat out Todd, or this is what I'm going to have to do this. Excuse me. So I just worked every single day, hoping to get a little bit better every single day. So when my moment came, that I was as prepared as possible. Yeah. So I just worked really, really hard. But since I wasn't the starter, I became the holder, and I held for Jamie Cole on the field goals. It was sort of go back to high school. What can I do to help this football team? What can I do to be on the field? Is it punter? Is it kicker? Is it this? Is it that? And it was to be the holder for Jamie Cole. And I know it sounds weird to be did the experience of being a holder help you play quarterback? Absolutely. To be on the field one way or another, to be on that stage for 40 or 50 plays out of the year is a huge help for when you're actually out there playing quarterback, because it's pretty nerve-wracking to walk out in front of 40 to 80,000 people and actually being a holder, and it helped, I think, give me value to my teammates of hey, this guy's a valuable aspect of this team, and when you're not playing, it's hard to always feel that way. But being the holder for Jamie Cole and working with Corey Kluver, our long snapper, those are my favorite moments of college football. Summertime in June or July on some intramural field with high school goalposts, kicking field goals and doing our countdowns as if we're going to beat the Hawkeyes on the next field goal with Jamie Cole and Corey Kluver. Great memories for me as an Iowa State student athlete.
Yeah. Well, heading into your junior year, which is 1999, you have established yourself as the chance to be the starter going into the season. And Iowa State had recruited a junior college transfer named Derek Walker. And so it was kind of a QB battle in fall camp, if I remember, between you and Derek. Kind of take us through that fall camp, and when it was finally decided that Coach Mack was going to go with you as the starter for the season opener against Indiana State. What was your feeling like? Like, you got it, you made it, you're going to be the starting quarterback at Iowa State.
Well, yeah. I wish it was that simple. Looking back, as you know, you sort of try to remember history. When January came, and Todd Bandauer was now, his eligibility was done, the natural thought would be like, Sage is going to be the next quarterback. He's been here for 3 years. But obviously Dan and the staff thought so highly of me, they recruited 2 junior college quarterbacks. There was Derek Walker, who came from Texas, and who I just saw last week at the Letter Winners Golf Tournament, and another kid from California. And the kid from California was not a fan of our winter conditioning and our strength program and all the work that it was going to be a Cyclone. So he didn't make it, past spring ball. He didn't make it through the first semester, that spring semester. So it was Derek and I through the summer and into training camp competing. And, Derek is such a good athlete, 6'4", probably 220 pounds, all muscle, strong arm, like all the elements that you're looking for as a quarterback. And Pete Hainer, who was our offensive coordinator, he came from Texas as well. So I sort of felt like Pete sort of wanted Derek to be the quarterback. Well, as we competed all spring and went back and forth, and every single day when you're in that, I've talked to Ryan Hartwell about this, when you're every single day competing for your job and it's never secured and it's not yours, that does push you to a level that maybe you never thought you could get to, or you wouldn't get to unless you truly had that competition. I think there's an element of that that's very, very true. So Derek and I competed. We get to the first game, and I'm named the starter, but I'm not the starter for the season. It was like, Sage is going to start this game, but we'll see how things go. Derek's also going to play. And, looking back, that game's played on a Saturday. I believe on the Saturday before that, there's a college football game on, sort of the early game, Purdue USC. And we're watching Drew Brees run the Purdue offense, and they're in shotgun, and they are sort of handing the ball off, but it looks like Drew is reading the defensive end. And the quote unquote zone read had not been a thing yet. It had not been a thing yet. And so we get to Sunday and Monday, and we really like this. And I ran the veer in high school, which is like putting the ball in the belly of the fullback and you're reading the defensive end. And so I had this experience of give or take it and run. And so we did that a few times. We practiced that throughout the week, and it was working really well for us. And I don't know if it was like the third play of the game versus Indiana State, the whole defense collapses on Darren Davis, and I run for about 50 yards for a touchdown. Nobody has any clue that this tall, skinny kid is running with the football. And so, just pretty wild how my sort of starting career got off to that type of start. Just right off the bat, score a touchdown. But Derek and I still definitely sort of competed for those first 4 or 5 games of that season. When we played Iowa in week 2, we got the lead up like 14-0, and so I think they didn't want to mess with it. So I played that entire game and got that win versus the Hawkeyes. But I think all the way until Missouri, Derek was playing for a quarter and a half, and he threw an interception in that game, and that was the end of it. And I ended up being the starter for the rest of that season. They moved Derek to defense for his senior year, and he started for us.
And did really well. And did really well at linebacker.
Became a very, very valuable element of our football team, linebacker, special teams. And he and I are friends to this day. We're both part of that great senior year that we had in 2000.
I always tell people, Sage, that Derek Walker was Joel Lanning before Joel Lanning. When Joel did that stuff, and everyone was just thinking it was amazing. But I go, well, we had a guy actually do this 20 years ago. And it's amazing how people kind of forgot that. But no, Derek had a great career. That 1999 season, in my opinion, is one of the most interesting seasons in Iowa State history, because although the record was 4-7, You guys were literally in every single game. And the step that that team made from 97, 98 to 99 was enormous. But to show how hard it was in that league, it only ended up to be a 4-7 season. However, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I truly believe what you guys did that year was huge in setting up what happened in 2000. But tell me about that 99 season, because you look back now and you're like, I mean, if you look in the record book, it says 4-7. Oh, they must not have been very good. But you guys were a really good football team.
We were a really good football team. And excuse me, in 98, we went down to Texas. I think we lost like 63-35. Yep. Ricky Williams had 350 yards in 3 quarters on us. Simply incredible. And then the next year, we almost beat them in Ames, 44-41. Had one of my better games of my career. And we had a lot of really, really close games. We're beating Kansas State 28-7 at halftime before losing. We just had a whole bunch of really, really close games, and we had closed that gap from my freshman year and that redshirt freshman year, right? We talked about we didn't even have a chance in half the games. Now all of a sudden, we're losing because of an untimely penalty or one turnover, or just the room for error between win and losing got really, really small. And so absolutely the 2000 season was sort of set up with the confidence that we gained from the 99 season. And it was sort of became this, like, if we could just believe more, because now we know we can compete with these teams. Kansas State's not way more talented than us. Texas is not way more talented than us. We truly felt we could compete and win if we just made the big play when it happened, when we needed to make it. And so that 99 team had a lot of talent on it. We had a lot of good junior college players as well that we had brought in 98 and 99. And we were very, very, very close. But it definitely set us up for a senior year. We truly felt that we could turn this thing around. We needed that. We needed that sort of, because up until that we weren't competitive a lot of times, and 4 or 5 games a year. And in that season we were competitive, and I believe like in every single one. No one blew us out by any means. And so it gave us we were learning how to win. And that sounds weird, but when I got to the NFL, a coach said to me, NFL games are really, really hard to win and really, really easy to lose. And when you're a college football team and you're trying to change the culture and the reputation and the whole program, it's that sort of fine line right there. You're right there in the middle there, those sort of in the middle of the pack in the conference, and trying to find ways to win games rather than, in Iowa State's history, sort of finding ways to lose games. And we were just not going to let those little mistakes. We're not going to let anybody on the football team allow them to make those mistakes. We were so committed in 2000, but it was a lot of it with the confidence we had, I think, coming from 1999.
Yeah. Well, before I dive into that amazing 2000 season that is, as Cyclone fans would almost all agree is one of the greatest in school history, I got to ask you about, your 2 years as a starter, Sage. You were blessed to have 2 amazing running backs to hand off to. And your first year was Darren Davis when he was a senior, and the next year was Ennis Haywood. 2 of the great ones. Both were multiple 1,000-yard rushers for Iowa State. What made them so great, and what were the differences between those 2? Because they were a lot different, weren't they?
Yeah, they were different backs. It's interesting that 99 season, we had many times where we had both of them on the field at the same time. Ennis Haywood, we'd slip him in as a fullback to, he was a bigger guy. Darren was shorter, Ennis was a little bit taller. And so we'd slip him in to run a play for the fullback in the flat or something, or a screen to the fullback, but he would block like a fullback. So there was a certain level of of sacrifice that was in that running back room of sort of like whatever it takes to win, we're ready to do. So yeah, Darren definitely had all the spin moves and the jukes, but there was a thing about the Davis brothers. You know, people of course remember them the way they ran, but the way that excuse me, the way they blocked was insane. Both of them broke many jaws in the Big 12 conference because since they were shorter and someone would blitz, or even a lot of times you would even have them block a defensive end on occasion. You know, guys that are 6'3" or 6'5", they'd get underneath their shoulder pads and up underneath their chin with their helmet and break guys' jaws. I saw it many times, and so there was an element of blocking as a tailback that was like ingrained in our running backs room of, this is a major part of what you do.
Yep.
As a running back, you're not just there to just run the football. And so, Darren could catch the ball in the backfield. He could run, he could block. And then when Ennis came for my senior year, or when he became the guy my senior year, he could do all those things as well. But the difference was that he was a little bit taller. He was faster. He had more breakaway speed. If you look back on Darren Davis's college career, he doesn't have a lot of runs that are 30 yards plus. Tons of incredible 15-yard runs.
Amazing runs.
We 10 and 25 yards. Amazing runs where we'd get him through to the secondary. He'd make that guy miss, and then he'd be off, but then he'd get tackled from behind, by a backside corner or safety. Ennis had that ability to take it to the house. And so, yeah, I was very, very blessed by two great running backs that could sort of do it all my junior and senior year. But on top of it, I was really blessed by an offensive line both of those years that I think still to this day are the best lines in Iowa State history. I really do believe that. We didn't have a bunch of guys go to the NFL, but man, it's especially my senior year. We had a great group of 6, 7, 8 guys, but we mostly played these 5, but we had some good backups too that were they were so good, and they had worked together. A lot of those guys were juniors and seniors, and so that development in the program and in the offense, and these guys really all working together. I'm the luckiest guy ever for have all these things sort of happen at the same time. To have Todd Bandauer didn't have my offensive line.
No, he did not.
Todd Doxson didn't have my offensive line, and I assume even later, the quarterbacks after me didn't have offensive lines like I had. So I was very, very blessed with a great offensive line and definitely great running backs. The 2 years I started at Iowa State.
Yeah. Well, we're going to start diving into the 2000 because there's a lot of amazing, memorable games. I just kind of want to get your recollections on. But before we get started, you talk about like that season, and I'm sure there's just all these games trigger elite memories. And to start it off was the big win in Iowa City, where you were 2-0 as a starter against Iowa. And I always wanted to ask you this question, just as a kid growing up in Eastern Iowa, that had to be like something a little more special than maybe the average guy on our team at that time, right?
Yeah. There's a couple of us from Eastern Iowa, but, Iowa State was definitely better recruiting, Central Iowa, the Des Moines schools, of course, Ames, Ryan Hartlaw from Humboldt, Iowa. Yeah. There's only so many guys from Eastern Iowa on that team. And when people ask me, what's your favorite game of your career? That's it. That's the game I go to. That's probably the most special to me.
You had 2 touchdowns in that game, and you kind of talked about the one in the corner.
Yeah, we early in the game we ran like an option off left tackle, and I could sort of smell the end zone. I was close, and so I just dove over the top and sort of fell into the end zone, probably clumsily. And so that was the first score. And then, at the end, we were up, I believe we were up 3, and Iowa was coming back. And we put a great drive together late in the fourth quarter. And then, Steve Loney called a bootleg on about the 8-10 yard line or so. And, I walk up to the ball, and I look over there, and I see this defensive end. And I know he's the guy. He's the guy I'm going to have to beat. And there's nobody but him. And make the fake and come around, and he had bid on the fake. And
I didn't know if you're going to get it on that play. I'm not going to lie to you.
I
was like, come on, you got to get those wheels going, Sage. I don't know if you're going to get in, but you did.
I did, yeah. My 4.75 speed barely got me in. So, it was, when I came around that corner and the defensive end had been on the fake and I knew I could capture the edge, what a great moment. Because if we kick a field goal there, we're up 6. That's a great way to lose a football game, being up 6. Almost rather be up 3 sometimes than be up 6. As crazy as that sounds in football, but then to dive into that corner of the end zone, and then I remember getting up, and there's sports are an interesting thing. You think when you win, like whether it's a game or a championship, there's this exhilaration. But sometimes, and in this case, you have 4.5 years of work and hard work and painful work, and 6 o'clock in the mornings, weight room or winter conditioning, and going to practice when it's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. When I scored that touchdown and I got up, I felt this giant release of relief that we had done it. Where we had beat the Hawkeyes, our senior year. It's like the pressure came off more than exhilaration of excitement that we had won. It was more this like release because we wanted it so bad. That our class was, I think, a very, very special class, and we wanted it so bad that that was sort of my feeling. After that, it was a giant, like, I think I threw my hands up in the air and I sort of brought them down, and I remember just taking like deep breath, and it was like this release of all this pressure that we had put on ourselves because we wanted to win. I wanted to win that game more than any other game my senior year. The bowl game was wonderful, so thrilled we won that, but I don't know if we don't beat the Hawkeyes, if we end up in that bowl game. It was early in the year, and how that was going to transition to the rest of the season. So. But just to, also to go 3-2 against the Hawks, to win my last 3 games, to do it in Iowa City, in that northeast end zone where I grew up going to a couple games, very, very special moment and special game for me.
That 2000 team, and I want to kind of go through Iowa State football history for some of the people that don't understand. The 2000 team won 3 Big 12 road games that year. You guys had beaten, I believe, Missouri on the road the year before.
Yep.
And that was 99. And that was the first conference road game that Iowa State had won since 1991. So think about that history of basically 8 years in a row without winning a conference road game. You finally get one in 99. And then 2000, you get 3. And the first one is one of my favorite games of all time, and it ended on a slant to Lane Danielson at Oklahoma State. What do you remember from that play? It was a 61-yard drive that basically clinched the game, and I have to put a disclaimer, I was in the press box that day, and I couldn't believe what I just saw. Just take us through that play.
Well, going into by the way, that we hadn't won an away game, conference game in all those years, Coach Mack would definitely make us aware of these things. This is our goal to win, a conference road game. Like, we hadn't done that, and they hadn't done that for so many years. And so he was great with having these like historical stats that sometimes were shocking because they were so unbelievable.
They were shocking. Yeah.
Shocking, right? So that game, going to Oklahoma State, they were not a great football team, but they were a good, very good program and good team. But that play, we had been running this concept where we had a slant on the outside and sort of like a bubble on the inside rather than a flat route, but still the same purpose was there to sort of stretch a defender. And we had run it 3 or 4 times in the game, and I hit the slant once or twice and hit the bubble a couple of times like J.J. Moses, and then he'd make a guy miss and get 8 yards out of it. So it was a new play we had put in. And it was also a play that I had the ability to audible to. We had some certain looks where when the defense was in a certain look, our coach would say, "Hey, this is a good audible play," and so yeah, we go up to that play, and I don't know. There's 40 seconds left or something in the game. We're roughly midfield. I don't.
The game's tied. I think the game's tied. Yep,
the game's tied. But we also know, if we would have gone 3-and-out and punted, there's a decent chance they get the ball in field range and we lose. And so, again, just like what I was talking about in 1999, how we just missed those moments, we rose to the moment. And I checked Rip Scooby was the name of that play. And when I got the snap and they were bringing the all-out blitz, that flat defender ran with the bubble route, and Lane Danielson cut inside the cornerback on his slant. I don't even know if I knew Lane Danielson was the guy running the route at the time. You don't always know who the receivers are out there. It's not as simple. Your guys are in and out, and threw a ball to a spot and hit him, I guess, decently in the chest on the run, and he took off, and that was out. Corner couldn't catch him, and there was no one there with that all-out blitz. And so, what a moment in that end zone, the celebration. We had guys coming off the sidelines. Ennis Haywood wasn't in on the play. He came off the sidelines without a helmet on.
I think he got flagged, didn't he?
We got flagged, of course. We weren't used to winning. Like, we didn't know how to.
I remember hearing the story that Mac was not happy about that celebration on that one.
So then we had to kick off from our own 20-yard line, and they got the ball at the 40 or something. And so that's how you lose games, actually, is by not knowing how to win, in a sense, and not knowing how to celebrate properly. And so. Fortunately, Dustin Avey or Adam Runk or whoever in the back end knocked down a couple Hail Mary balls at the end, and we secured that win. So that was an extremely special win too. Looking back now, you're starting to bring me back into those moments. I feel like it took us 40 minutes to sort of get off the field. I feel like I was hugging guys and thanking guys and hugging coaches. For a long, long time as we sort of went into that locker room. I feel like I stood outside, at the back of the end zone, and, I was going to be sort of the last one in and basically just hug everybody and thank everybody. That was such a huge, huge win for that senior year. Again, one of those games that we would have lost before that, but that senior year we just refused to lose games like that.
Next game I want to bring up, Sage, in 2000 was the Missouri game at home. And obviously it held great significance because that made you bowl eligible with 6 wins. And, once again, a quick history lesson. It had been 22 years since Iowa State had been to a bowl game. And you knocked off Missouri to get win number 6 at home. I beat them pretty good, 39-20, I think it was. What do you remember from the locker room after that game?
Well, I do remember a few things from that game. I remember J.J. Moses catching a pass and running down the left sideline in the south end zone and stiff-arming a guy at about the 7-yard line and trucking him over and as he fell into the end zone. I remember throwing a post route to Chris Anthony in that football game, who Chris Anthony was basically me playing receiver. We played high school basketball together. I remember Mark Timmons, who was a safety, a freshman safety for us, who wore my same number 18, making a huge interception in that game. Maybe even a pick 6.
It was,
in that game. And so, I think at that time we had so much confidence, and Missouri was a team that was just okay, that this is a team we're going to beat. And so we had sort of taken that next step, I think, of truly believing we could beat anyone we played. And so, I remember after the game in the locker room, we had won the quote telephone trophy. I'm not sure if they don't have anymore because Missouri's in another conference.
Yeah, and I think Missouri won the last one, so it may be in a storage room in Columbia somewhere. I don't know where it's at.
So the telephone trophy was this rivalry trophy between Iowa State and Missouri, and it was based off of somehow the the headphones got mixed up in some year, and like
it was in the 50s.
Yeah, the teams could hear each other on the other end or something, and so they named this thing this telephone trophy. And I really remember in the locker room, and the it was a fairly good sized trophy, and on the top there really was like an old school telephone, like a rotary phone.
And you could pick it up.
You could pick it up, and Dan McCarney picked it up, and it was like, acting like he was talking to the bowl people, at the bowl committees or something, and our whole locker room just went nuts. And so that's what I remember from that game. Obviously a night game, and I scored a quarterback draw from the 10-yard line. They called it a quarterback draw somehow, and I squirted through there and end up scoring as well. So yeah, good memories from that game, but probably none of them bigger than the Dan McCarney post game celebration in the locker room.
Well, speaking of Coach McCarney, he had I just think an awesome quote after that game. I'm going to read it to you. It said, "A lot of people said I was committing professional suicide coming here. It's going to be hard to say that you can't win at Iowa State after tonight. We're not where we want to be yet, but we're getting a hell of a lot closer. Instead of going to relatives at Christmas time this year, maybe we can go someplace else and play another game instead of watching everybody else play." And I just think that's an awesome quote, because if you really think about it, for 22 years, that's what Iowa State football did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and there's huge disadvantages when you don't go to a bowl game. I mean, you should talk about it. When you go to a bowl game, you get an extra, 3 weeks.
All the practices.
3 weeks of practicing. You get all these freshmen who are redshirting, just to get. It's like an extra spring ball, and of course, much less for recruiting to say you went to a bowl game or won a bowl game, all those things. But just the extra practice time for the guys that weren't even going to play in the game, but to build them up for the following year, it's a huge advantage for a team to get to a bowl game just for that extra practice time.
Well, once again, we're with Sage Rosenfels, one of the greatest quarterbacks in Iowa State history, and we're already 52 minutes in, so I'm going to have to temper this because we could make this 3 hours. But the next game we probably could talk for an hour about, and it's the Colorado win in Boulder. And there's so many amazing plays and things that happened in that game. The one big thing was the guy I'm talking to right now ran for over 140 yards, basically on a blizzard, snowy field where it just felt like that could be the only way we could get rushing yards. But so many amazing things happened in that game. But first of all, I do want to ask you is when you started basically doing quarterback draws in the second half, was that just okay, I think we're going to change this because their footing was so bad that we could make this play work?
Well, take a step back. We're staying at the Westin in, I think it's Westminster, Colorado. It's about 15 minutes from Boulder. And the morning before the game, or if it was the night before the game, Coach Matt gives a speech. We have offensive and defensive meetings. And I talked to the team that, I grew up in the country. I grew up playing sports with my brothers in the backyard, in the snow, not in the snow, whatever. And I said, guys, this is not going to be like a normal football game. This is just going to be a backyard, beat them up, find a way to win style of game. It's not going to be the team that draws up the prettiest plays. It was going to be, because it was snowing at the time. It was going to snow all night. We just knew it was going to be this type of sloppy, nasty game. And so, early on, we ran a zone read. I ran about 40 yards down the left sideline before being very easily dragged down probably by a D lineman or something. And we had a concept in that game where we would fake to a running back. If we had two running backs, I would fake to one running back that would cross me and then hand it off to the other running back, who would have a guard pulling around as sort of a lead blocker. But we also could do that as me as sort of a second running back, where I'd fake to a running back and then go in the opposite direction and sort of follow my guard. And we probably ran that play 10 times in that game and just consistently got 6s and 8s and 9s. I'd sort of squirt through there and get some decent yardage in that. And, when you can sort of control the line of scrimmage and that type of weather, it's huge. And it was definitely a big advantage. You'd think a game like that would be low scoring. I don't know what the final score was, but I think it was I think 35-28 or 30.
I think that's close.
Something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
So I think we won by 8, but fairly high scoring. And when you're in those terrible conditions, surprisingly, the offenses, if they don't fumble a lot, have a big advantage because they know where they're going. And so the defenses, struggle with their footing and those things in that game. And yeah, those quarterback runs worked a lot. I threw a couple curl routes to J.J. Moses where he would catch them, and then one time
he had the big catch and run that really got us back on top after because you guys were down early. Colorado looked like they had control, but that play that you threw to J.J. where he made so many people miss down the stretch, and was that the one where he kind of dove at the end to kind of get into the end zone?
That's right. Yeah. Well, when it's really snowy out, it helps to be low to the ground, and JJ was 5'6". So I think he had a little bit of an advantage over, the 6'1", 6'2" safeties and corners that Colorado had. So he made a big catch and run in that game. And of course, at the very, very end, we were up 5, and Coach Mack decides to kick a field goal. I think a 44, 45-yard field goal.
Yeah.
I mean, it had snowed probably 3 or 4 inches during the game. The center of the field was just mud and mush. Colorado played on a grass field back then. I'm not sure if they still play it now. And anything outside the hashes was just basically white at that point, and they'd probably brush the sidelines, where the sidelines were. And we try a 45-yard field goal, and Carl Gomez,
who wasn't our field goal kicker, he was our punter, right?
Yeah. So Carl was our punter for 4 years. He did not redshirt, so he ended up being in my class my senior year. And that Oklahoma State game that we won, our field goal kicker had missed, his 5th extra point of the year or something, and Coach Mack was like, "Screw it, Carl, you're the kicker from here on out." And he hadn't kicked really since high school. He would a little bit in practice here and there, but we hadn't practiced with him. Nothing, and he's left-footed.
So you got to get a new battery out there, right?
Yeah, The holder has no idea how to hold the left. You wouldn't believe how hard that is, actually.
It's really hard, isn't it?
Really hard to do, to switch it around. Didn't know how to hold left-footed, and Carl found a way to get the ball through the uprights in the Oklahoma State game and stayed the kicker throughout the year. And when he kicked that ball, there was about 3 inches of snow on the crossbar, and when that ball crossed over, some snow poofed up in the air. I mean, he made it by a less than a foot over that. So the man upstairs or whoever helped us out a little bit. But the great foot of Carl Gomez from Killian High School in Miami, Florida, in the middle of winter in Colorado, comes through with an enormous kick. And then at the very, very end, so now we're up 8, and they're moving the ball to come tie us. And they fumble on a 3rd and 1 or a 4th and 1 at about our own 10-yard line. And Reggie Hayward, our star defensive end, who played in the NFL for a long time, from what I remember, he was like the 9th person to jump into that pile for when that fumble occurred. And somehow he came out with the football. Yeah. And that was it. We sort of ran out the clock with a couple Ennis Haywood runs and got a first down, and that was it. But that was a special locker room afterwards. I remember sort of going into the bathroom area. I was so exhausted. But when we got that Missouri win to get the 6 wins, that was nice. But we didn't want to be a 6-5 team that went to a bowl game that just sort of snuck in and got a little bit lucky. We wanted to be like, oh, this is a really good football team. And so that was our 7th win. And so that really made us feel different. And to beat Colorado, who was a big brand at that time in college football, that was huge. We hadn't done that before. We'd come close in some other seasons, but we had never beat them since I'd been there. So
I think that was the first win over Colorado since '83.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So that was probably the most emotional win I ever had, as far as how I felt afterwards in the locker room, and talking to guys and coaches, because it was such a magical way to win a football game. You sort of draw, when you think about playing college football, pro football, whatever it is, football is not like basketball. We play in all the conditions, right? In baseball, if it rains, you go inside. But in football, you play in all conditions. And to go play at Colorado in the mountains, in the snow, and to win a game like that feels like something a little bit out of the Disney movie that you were just in. That was the most emotional, I think, after that game. That one felt so good to get that victory.
Yeah. Well, you finished the season with another win at home over Kansas to get 8 wins. And then now you get the bowl against Pittsburgh in the Inside.com Bowl, going to Phoenix. And, Sage, you had the best game statistically probably in your career in that bowl game with 308. I think it was a career high for you, 308, passing yards. Game was really interesting game. Iowa State looks like you're going to win by 50. It's 27-7. And, obviously Pittsburgh's a really good football team, and they start chipping away, and it's getting, now it's a 1-score game. And so many things obviously happened in that game as well. But the one I always want to ask you about is Jermaine Billups' punt return that kind of re-energized the group to get that win.
Yeah.
What do you remember from that play and then everything else from that game?
Well, there's a lot of things I remember from that game, of course, right? Just like Max said, we're somewhere warm in December practicing, down in Phoenix, Arizona. That was just to practice on really, really short grass, on some junior college field or wherever we were, was interesting. We had the Arizona Cardinals head coach come and talk to us after practice. I got sick going into that game. I realized I'm our season ends, we're practicing, I'm graduating, I'm moving. I had to move out of my apartment because when I come back, I'm leaving to go get ready for the Senior Bowl that I had been accepted to, get ready for the combine. I was going to fly to New Orleans after that and train down there for 6 or 7 weeks. And so there's just so much going on in your life at that point. And I got sick going into that game. We really, the first half, we really controlled the line of scrimmage. We ran the ball well. JJ was making plays in the secondary. Our defense was playing great. We had a blocked field goal in that game. Hit Chris Anthony on a backside post route that I don't think I ever threw, ever. It was like a sprint out to the left, but if the safety came up too tight, there was a backside post that was just to sort of hold him, and Chris had to step on the guy and put the ball in the money there. JJ got knocked out on a reverse. We gave him a reverse net game, and his helmet came flying off, and so that was the end of that for him. And so they had a receiver named Antonio Bryant, who had a really nice NFL career.
Really good player.
Really good player. First, second team All-American, and he had a pretty big game. No matter when we were trying to double team him, and he just would run past our double teams. And so they inched their way back into that football game. And again, we were in that spot where we were a little bit like that Iowa game. We were starting to sort of lose control of the game. And so, the question is, were we going to make that big play or not? And when past years we hadn't. And so I'm sitting over there. JJ's our punt returner. I'm next to him on the bench.
Yeah, he's out now.
He's completely out of it. And so we have Jermaine Billups back there, a redshirt freshman, who I don't think returned a punt all year other than in practice, and whose cousin, by the way, was Chauncey Billups, the guard. And Jermaine catches it, and I'm just like happy he secured it. And then next, there's a wall down our right sideline for him to walk into the end zone. And so, what a feeling that is. Like, again, another almost a feeling more of relief than exuberation. Like we're going to win this thing. And I believe they end up maybe getting another score or working their way back. And then at the very, very end, as we're running out the clock, when you're doing the kneel downs, there's a formula there of how much time's left and how many timeouts do they have and this and that. And I remember, as everyone is sort of celebrating that we're going to win, and knowing like I have to use as much time as possible because the numbers didn't add up.
Yep, I remember this now.
And it was also less precise back then. As you you kneel down, and I don't think the 40-second clock didn't just start. The official probably had to reset the clock or whatever it was. And so I remember, going into the last play, our fourth down, and there's like 45 seconds left, and I'm like, this is not gonna maybe 43 left, and I'm like, I can't just snap it and kneel down, or else we're going to they're going to have a chance with 1 second on the clock for a Hail Mary, and we weren't even at midfield yet. And so basically I took the snap and just ran backwards for about 3 seconds, about 15 yards, and just dove down and sort of so I wouldn't fumble and lose the game. And so and then of course after that, the fans rushing the field. Iowa State had never won a bowl game before. The huge advantage that we had going into that game as far as the fans, there's probably 25,000.
It was amazing, wasn't it?
It was amazing. 25,000 Iowa State fans, maybe 6,000 Pittsburgh fans. It was a total home game for us, but I think that generations of Iowa State fans wanted to make the most of the first bowl win in school history. And we definitely celebrated on that field for a while.
How much? Okay, so the game ends, and obviously you're the offensive MVP and had an incredible game. When you look back now, Sage, how much do you think that game helped you as you were preparing for the NFL draft? Now, nowadays, a lot of guys obviously would opt out, wouldn't play.
Yeah.
You're a fifth-year senior. That mindset wasn't around back then. Obviously, no one would do that back then. But my opinion is, I really think that helped you playing in that game, doing what you did, and then helping you as you went through the draft with all the scouts.
When you are on a team that turns it around like we did, that was a part of our conversations, my conversations a lot with NFL teams. I went to the Combine, and I sat in a room with the entire Kansas City Chiefs organization. They didn't have a quarterback really as a starter. They ended up trading for Trent Green a few months later, because that was the Kurt Warner St. Louis time. And they were so fascinated by how the heck we turned it around at Iowa State to go from this 20 plus years of losing to winning 9 games. And the quarterback gets a lot of that credit sometimes. Probably too much, but definitely too much. But NFL teams are looking for sort of those program changers. Excuse me. And they love guys who just sort of know how to win, find a way to win, those guys that have grit. And so that was definitely something we talked about with the various teams I talked to. And I specifically remember being in Kansas City's sort of hotel room suite at the Combine, and it wasn't just the quarterbacks coach, which I did a lot of those interviews, but it was the offensive coordinator. It was Dick Vermeil. It was Carl Peterson, the GM. There may have been some ownership in there, I'm not sure, but there was about 15 people in the room talking about this magical 9-3 season that we had, talking about Coach Mack, how we turned it around. I did. Then weeks later, I did a private workout for the Chiefs. I have J.J. Moses come to that workout. If you ever hear J.J. Moses speak at all, he gives these great speeches, and he talks about the moment that Dick Vermeil walked up to him and said, "Son, you've made it the NFL today," based off of this workout. They were really just working me out, but they saw how explosive he was and how quick he was, and he had great hands.
Yeah.
And so that was definitely a big thing with my my draft stock. Wasn't just like my physical capabilities and my height and my weight and this, that. It was that I was a part of this team that really turned it around. And there was a quarterbacks coach named Mike Johnson, who at the time was the Chiefs or not the Chiefs, but the Chargers quarterback coach, the San Diego Chargers, where they should be. And of course, they ended up drafting Drew Brees, and he came to my private workout. It was him, Brian Schottenheimer, Wade Wilson. Brian Schottenheimer was in Washington, and Wade Wilson of the Cowboys. They came to my private workout at Iowa State. So I sort of got to know all 3 of those guys. later on during my rookie season, we played San Diego, and I talked to Mike Johnson before the game, the quarterbacks coach, and of course they had drafted Breeze. And he said to me something I found interesting. He goes, the way I rate a quarterback when they come out isn't just basically off of like what I see from physical skills. It's if I take that guy off of that team, how well does the team do? That's how he really judges the value of the quarterback. And so, of course, Drew Brees, the all-timer with that, right? He goes to Purdue, who hadn't been good in who knows how long. Brian Greasy back in probably the 60s or whatever, and then they win the Rose Bowl. So he was looking for sort of a program changer in a sense. And so obviously that's why they had some interest in me as well.
Yeah. Well, you get drafted in the 4th round by the Redskins, or I'm sorry, the Commanders. I'm sorry.
Yes, by Washington.
The Washington football team. And you had, Sage, I don't think many people would have ever thought that you probably would have an 11-year NFL career, and you did it. And you had a great career. And you think about the kid growing up in Eastern Iowa and had all these options. Did you ever think that was possible to make it that long in the NFL?
No, not at all. I got drafted again, sort of going back to Iowa State when like my goal was just to start my senior year and maybe get a job in Des Moines because someone knew my name. Yeah. My thought, my pro career was if I can just make it this year, that would be great. I'd have $500,000 in my pocket, great down payment on a new house, and then go on with whatever my business life was going to be. So everything just became basically 11 one-year contracts. I had 4-year contracts, but to me, they were 1-year contracts. And how do I play this year so a team will want me next year?
Yeah.
And how do I practice? How do I prepare? The preseason games, of course. And my rookie year, I am so unprepared for what the NFL is throwing at me. The complexities of the offenses and the formations and the details and all the protections. Our offense at Iowa State was fairly simple, but we were really good at it. And then you get the NFL teams, and it's just a whole nother level. And so I also really struggled throwing the NFL football. So it was a complete struggle. But when I actually played in the preseason games, I played pretty well. So when the lights turned on, I did some good things. And so, of course, made it that rookie year, didn't play at all. But, Marty Schottenheimer, I had, my first ever meeting, I sit down in the back of the room, and this little guy comes and says, "Hey, you're in my seat." And so I move over one, and that was Darryl Green, 20 years in the NFL.
Oh, yeah.
And then on the other side of me was Bruce Smith, like year 18 or 17, 2 Hall of Famers. And, it's pretty weird to come from Maquoketa, Iowa, and then to be in Washington, D.C., and stay next to Hall of Famers and true legends. I grew up watching the '85 Bears, and of course I remember lots of great games with Darryl Green and Washington and their battles in the playoffs and things like that. So in my NFL career, it's a whole other oddity of stories. I got to play for Marty Schottenheimer, Steve Spurrier, Dave Wanstead, Nick Saban, Gary Kubiak, Brad Childress, Tom Coughlin, and then finished up in Minnesota at the end. And but on my Houston team, people have heard me talk about it. What a staff that we had. Kyle Shanahan was my quarterback's coach.
Yeah.
Matt LaFleur was our quality control. Mike McDaniel, quality control. Robert Saleh, quality control. D'Amico Ryans, we drafted in the 2nd round. And those 5 head coaches
right now
that was on that one staff, and all of them, people would probably say are 5 of the top 10 head coaches right now in the National Football League. And so it was an unbelievable journey through all of that, but it was complete. I mean, Jason Garrett was my backup quarterback for my first career start, right? I mean, and then next year was my quarterback's coach with Nick Saban, and then next thing you know, he's the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. And so that was an unbelievable journey in on itself, and lots of memories and lots of stories and lots of odd moments. But every single day you work every single day so that season is as good as possible, so you have a chance to play next year as well. And that's how I sort of looked at things. And so every single lift, every single practice, every single quarterback meeting, they were all vital to whatever my career was going to be, and somehow parlay that into 11 seasons and a 12th training camp. Oddly, my 12th training camp, which I didn't make the team in Minnesota, I made more money than my rookie year in Washington by getting cut.
Yeah.
That's the way the NFL works sometimes.
Well, your seventh year, Sage, you were with the Texans, and you started 5 games that year, went 4-1 as a starter, threw for over 1,600 yards, 15 touchdowns. That had to have been one of your favorite memories of your career.
Yeah, when I played for Gary Kubiak in 2006, 7, and 8, those first 5 years, I felt like I was just good enough to play in the NFL, and scared like crazy to actually get in the game, right? But I could sort of compete in practice and things, and hadn't really played much, spare times in some blowout games, and of course a lot in the preseason, which I always played well in the preseason. But in Gary Kubiak's offense, he made things. They had that thing dialed in so well from the old Denver Broncos offense with Mike Shanahan and John Elway, and they had it dialed in, and it felt like everything was sort of black and white. I knew exactly what I was supposed to do. I knew my job. I knew the reads. I learned coverages and how defenses worked at a whole more higher level than I had in the past, whether I played for Brian Schottenheimer or Norv Turner or Jason Garrett. Kyle was so good at truly understanding how defenses worked, and how they worked from what their gap responsibilities in the run game. I'd never really been taught that before. Those fine details. And the more information I truly had about how defenses worked, the quicker I could process information on offense. And they had great concepts, and I played really well in that offense. And as that 2000 season started to go, I really felt like I can do this. I'm an NFL quarterback. I hadn't really felt like that before. I felt like I was a little bit of a poser because these guys are all better than me. But that season, I felt like I think I'm one of the best 32 quarterbacks in the world. I felt fully confident in what I was doing. I think my teammates felt confident in me. And the game was no longer scary to me as it was my first 5 seasons.
Yeah. Sage, who was your favorite teammate you had, and who was the best defender that you ever had to face? And I guess I don't want you to have to single out a favorite teammate, but who was one of your favorite teammates?
Well, as far as great defenders, I mean, I remember starting off my rookie year, they have Champ Bailey is our starting corner, Hall of Famer. When I was Zach Thomas may have been one of my favorite teammates. He's up there. Now, when I was in Miami, we had Junior Seau, Hall of Fame, Zach Thomas, Hall of Fame, Jason Taylor, Hall of Fame on our defense. Of course, we had Ricky Williams, who was, I got about 100 stories about the oddities of Ricky. But Zach Thomas, he, when I got traded to Miami from Washington, I showed up there. I went to a practice, got an airplane. We flew to Houston for a preseason game of the opening of what is now, I think it's called NRG Stadium now. And it was the opening of that stadium, the first year of the Houston Texans. And so we're in our team hotel, and Zach Thomas just sort of brings me over and just starts introducing me to his family. He's from Texas, but there was
a Big 12 guy, Texas Tech.
Well, that's what it was. It was this Big 12 guy, but I wasn't a Texas guy. I wasn't an A&M guy. I wasn't an Oklahoma guy. I was sort of a smaller school in a sense, like Texas Tech. And I think there was something there with that. And Zach had that sort of small school mentality of he literally was 5'10" and just made a gazillion tackles and
he was one of the best ever.
Had all the grit you could ever imagine, but also just the ultimate team player. And so I knew him as like, this guy's a superstar on this football team, but he didn't act that way at any level. And so, I had a lot of great teammates, and Zach was definitely up there. And last year I got to go to Canton for his induction to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And,
oh, wow.
And he's a special guy, and he's definitely a special teammate.
In 2009, you signed with the Minnesota Vikings, and it was one of their best seasons in the last 20, 30 years. And that was the year that Brett Favre was the quarterback and made the NFC Championship game and lost in a gut-wrenching final drive against the New Orleans Saints. A couple questions on that season. What was it like to be in the same quarterback room with Brett Favre? And what are your memories from that game? That final game?
Yeah, so I played pretty well in Houston, and as you said, in 2007 I was 4-1, and I was sort of trying to get a couple teams who wanted to trade for me at the end of that year. It was my second year, but I had a 4-year contract, and so Houston had all the leverage, and so it was asking for some fairly high draft picks from the various teams that were interested. The Jets at the time, Minnesota at the time, and so nothing happened. And then after the next season, I didn't play as well. I was 2-3 as a starter. And so my value, and I had only 1 year left in my contract. And so I guess my value from a trade perspective was a little bit lower than it was the previous year. So I think for like a 4th round pick, I really wanted to start. And I knew I was at this moment in my career where I was either going to be a career backup, or I was going to maybe have one chance to truly be a starter.
Yep.
And I had seen this occur, guys like Rich Gannon, or even like a Trent Green or Kurt Warner.
Absolutely.
Like,
guys later on in their career got a chance.
You really start understanding the game, and you sort of work your way up from the bottom to good enough to be a starter. And so, Minnesota had a team loaded with talent. They were 10-6 the year before. They'd gone to the playoffs, but their quarterback situation was pretty average. Tavares Jackson had started a lot. Gus Frerotte had been there. So they didn't have like an elite starter. And so I was super excited to go up there and be a part of this football team that had Adrian Peterson and Jared Allen and Steve Hutchinson, all Hall of Fame type guys, and Kevin Williams, who I think should probably be in the Hall of Fame. Really like one of the more loaded rosters in the NFL. So I get there, and Tavares and I are competing, and mid-training camp, we get pulled into Brad's office and says, "Hey, we're going to sign Brett Favre today." And it was an odd moment. It was sort of like, well, at least I have no pressure on me anymore. That's what it sort of felt like. It was like, there's so much pressure going into like, this is my first chance to be a starter. And all of a sudden it's like, well, now I get to see how this thing goes. And that was a magical, wild season with all sorts of interesting games and unbelievable performances by Brett. I mean, I'd never been around a quarterback that played like him, that had the arm like him, that had the toughness, the way he would throw balls into super tight windows and hit guys in the chest and throw it as hard as he could. If I threw the ball as hard as I could, it would explode in the air and not be like a spiral. And Brett's was just, it wouldn't be accurate. The Brett's were. And so and there were some miracle games in that season. There were some just sort of wild things that happened. Brad Childress, our head coach, and Brett were not really on the same page. Yeah. It was not a super cohesive world there. But we made it all the way to the NFC Championship game and lost in overtime to the Saints, who ended up winning the Super Bowl to go to the Super Bowl. So the the end of that game was wild. We have a 51-yard. We're on the 33-yard line. So we have a 51-yard field goal to go to the Super Bowl, and it's third and 1, I think, or 3rd and 2, and we call a passing play. And I remember hearing the passing play in my little headset and being like, I wouldn't do that, and we put too many guys in the huddle. We have 12 men in the huddle. We get a 5-yard penalty. Now we're at a 56-yard field goal.
Yeah, that's
Ryan
right.
Longwell's our kicker, who is at the end of his career, and so he's very accurate. But 56 yards is
not a gimme.
Not a gimme, and we are indoors, but probably beyond his or right there at the edge. And so we run that same passing play, and we line up, and they come out, we're hoping to get man to man, and they see our bunch set. They check to cover 2, and Brett has no one open, and he sort of rolls out to the right, tries to throw a crazy pass back to his left as he would do, and gets intercepted, and they end up kicking a field goal in overtime. We never touched the ball, and I think we had 500 yards of offense. They had about 250. I mean, we dominated that football game. Adrian had a fumble or 2. Of course, Brett threw that interception, and that was the only time I was ever in the playoffs, and that was the closest I ever got to the Super Bowl. And of course, that season ended in heartbreaking fashion. And you fly home late Sunday night in the middle of the night, couldn't sleep at all because you're just really like a traumatic experience where you are just replaying what happened in that game, and all like what happened there, what happened here, and I couldn't sleep that night. Monday night, couldn't sleep, and on Tuesday, my mom said, "Well, you should just write it all down. Just write down all your thoughts on that game and the season, and so then it'll be sort of off your chest, to think about anymore." Well, oddly, it turns out that when I retired 4 years later, I met with Peter King in New York for a cup of coffee, because I was like, well, what am I going to do now? And he was in the media, of course, and he asked me about Brett Favre, and talked about various things, and I said, I wrote this, a couple thousand words on that season and that game. Let me know if you ever want to list it or read it. And he goes, "Oh, I would love that." So I sent it to him, and 3 months later or something, it was in Sports Illustrated, and ended up being in Favre's commemorative edition for when he retired, a year or 2 after that. And so that was my first ever article, and probably the highest article I ever wrote. So I never got to that level again of another article in Sports Illustrated. So that was a little bit of my introduction to life after football, at least for a little bit.
Yeah, and you've done a fantastic job, Sage, in life after football. You kind of reinvented yourself. You've been in the media, you've been an analyst, and one of the great opportunities you got to do was actually be the football color analyst for Iowa State football games. And how much did you enjoy doing that, for one, and two, when you've been around the program like you have, because you've been to practices and you've kind of been watching. You had the chance to see Brock Purdy when he was playing here, and you had the chance to actually meet with him a couple times. I don't know if the word is shocked, but were you a little surprised of how well he's done in the NFL, or did you kind of see some of those attributes when he was here at Iowa State?
Yeah, so I look back when I saw Brock Purdy as a freshman, and I remember going to a practice, and they had someone else as a starter, and Skip, who is Matt Campbell's sort of right-hand man, he goes, "Yeah, this Purdy kid." I tell you, they had been in training camp for a month or so, and he's like, "This Purdy kid's like just a playmaker. It's like every time he's in, he's just like making plays." And so, I'm looking at him like he's sort of squatty, doesn't have a big arm, the ball doesn't spin great, just sort of like, okay, well, we'll see how this kid is. And so, he gets out there his freshman year. And, going back to what we just talked about, like my career, I could never have imagined playing as a freshman because I feel like I was so far behind the level that you needed to be. It's like I couldn't imagine playing as a rookie in the NFL either. And this kid was playing pretty dang well. And so I'm always super impressed when a freshman gets out there and actually plays pretty well.
Yep.
And the throws that he was making, his anticipation was just insane. The way he'd duck and move and throw the ball into a tight window and just over a linebacker to a deep crossing route. I was like super, super impressed. And I was super impressed his whole career. He never, just he had a lot of games where I felt like he was asked to do a lot to win the football game. And I threw for 8 or 10 touchdowns my senior year. I wasn't asked to do nearly as much as he was to win football games. And so I was super, super impressed with him. Met with him maybe 2 times during his time at Iowa State. Just watch some film, watch the NFL film, talk a little football, go out and throw, and sort of work on some footwork things a little bit. But really, it was after he graduated Iowa State. I've been working with some of these quarterback gurus around the country I've gotten to know over the years. And there's one guy, Will Hewlett, he's down in Jacksonville, and Brock, sure enough, he goes down there, starts working with Will. And, what are we working on? We're working on like snaps from under center, right? Drop back pass from under center. Iowa State was almost all shotgun.
Pretty much.
And we're talking about play action and bootlegs and these things that I know he's going to do more in the NFL than he did, at Iowa State. And then what he and I would do is we would watch film through Zoom, and I would break down just various teams, and we'd watch some Vikings, Kirk Cousins. We'd watch. But what's oddly is all my language. Like when I think of NFL language, of all the offenses I was in, it's not Norv Turner's language or Marty Schottenheimer's language or Kevin Gilbride when I was with the Giants and Eli. It was Kyle Shanahan and what we did during my Houston years.
So which would have been really influential to him as he was preparing for Niners training camp.
I mean, I'd like to think so. I'd like to think it was a help. Brock's the one that would really have to answer like how helpful actually was it to have, say, Rosenfels, talk football and talk about defenses and fronts and formations and use that language that Kyle or LaFleur or McDaniel, that those guys now use. And the reason I did that is one is just I had that offense had the biggest impact on me and how I see football to this day. But also I knew about half the teams in the NFL were starting to run that type of offense. Their quarterbacks coaches were becoming coordinators in other places. And so if I could sort of teach Brock an offense that half the teams were using, I thought that would be a leg up for him as far as trying to make an NFL team. And so, then he gets out there his rookie year and just starts playing great. And I remember watching a preseason game, and I'm like, I think Purdy is going to do really well in Kyle's offense. I think the world of Kyle Shanahan, I don't throw out genius all that much, but from a NFL perspective, an offensive perspective, and what he does coaching, he is a bit of a coaching genius. I do believe he's a step ahead of most coaches in pro football. He's super, super advanced at this point beyond even what I know, because I watch the games. I still see a lot of the same concepts, but I also see things that are different than I was playing with them, of course. But for Brock to land with Kyle, and then Brian Greasy, I played with Brian in Miami too, and Brian's one of the smartest guys I ever played with, a political science major at Michigan, and now he's a quarterbacks coach. You don't get that a lot of times with quarterbacks coaches in the National Football League. So for Brock to land a spot, which I think is the best offensive mind of football, with the quarterbacks coaches who I imagine is one of the best quarterbacks coaches in football, and then to have a great defense and John Lynch being the GM and putting that team together, there really wasn't probably a better spot for Brock. But at the end of the day, Brock he is making it happen. He's not just out there managing the game. You watch these games and he is making plays. He is putting balls in super, super tight windows that Jimmy Garoppolo was not doing, and other quarterbacks that were in the league for a long time were definitely not doing. He is playing at a Pro Bowl level in his first 2 seasons, and it's not just because he's got a great football team and a great offensive coordinator. Yeah. Brock is, I'd like to think he's going to be one of these guys in a couple of years making $50-60 million a year. He is playing at the level of the top quarterbacks in the National Football League, and that's that is simply unbelievable, but well deserved. And the way he carries himself, I think, has a big impact on why he is and why his teammates love him so much. I think if he would have been one of these top college guys and been arrogant or whatever, he wouldn't be having the success that he has. But the way Brock is, and the way the grit that he has, and the self-belief, but also like just the way he's such a team player, that goes a long way in an NFL locker room and on a team of earning the respect of the guys around you. And I think he's going to be the San Francisco 49ers quarterback for a long time.
Yeah, I do too. And it's been just amazing, obviously, to watch. And, what also has been amazing, in my opinion, is what Matt Campbell's done with the Iowa State football program. And as an alum, how much satisfaction have you gotten seeing what Coach Campbell has done with Iowa State, and plus how he's embraced Coach McCarney and the former players to make them feel welcome and special when they do come back?
I mean, you couldn't ask for anything more. I mean, there's nothing I could ask for more of what Matt Campbell's done for, I guess, my school. The school that I went to, that my diploma is from. They couldn't ask for a better ambassador for Iowa State. He understands the state of Iowa. He understands the unique spot that Iowa State is in. From a financial standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint, from the people that make Iowa State special, and how in a lot of ways it's a better job than going to even some of these sort of top schools where there's an insane amount of pressure and political nonsense that goes on of, the AD or the president or boosters sort of trying to control the program in all these various ways. I think he really appreciates that element of Iowa State. But yeah, the fact that I think that he went to Mount Union, the sort of powerhouse Division III school, and the culture that he learned there of how to have a true program for a long time, for decades, is a winner, and what that culture looks like, and then to bring that to Iowa State is incredible for us. Because a lot of times, you as an athletic director, you sign a guy from a smaller school that's done well, and you bring him up to the Big 12, and we're a stepping stone to go somewhere else. And that hasn't been the case, with him. He firmly believes in building a program for decades that can be a real special, unique place. But yeah, how he has embraced us as former players, that we can sort of just show up to practice. And he takes, if I say something to him, he's listening. And I think he has a ton of respect for Coach Mack, of course, but the guys that played for Coach Mack, because he's been around it long enough to understand how hard it must have been in 95, 96, 97, 98, those years that were very, very thin. And for the guys like Ryan Harklaw, who does the sideline stuff, and all the guys that we played with those years, the grit it must have taken to turn that program around and to follow Coach Mack's lead. I've always felt a lot of respect, and a lot of my teammates do, from him. Like, he actually understands what we went through to get to the program, to a bowl level program. And, of course, he's taken it to another level consistently. And that was our dream. That was what Dan McCarney sold on us, is, we're going to look back and we're going to build, we're the foundation of a football program. We're the concrete, we're the basement, we're the sticks and the bricks. And then this program is going to build over decades ahead. And Matt Campbell has built Iowa State into where, when I'm around the country and people say, "Where'd you go to school?" I say, "I went to Iowa State," and they will say, "You guys got a good football program up there."
And that makes me feel so good to hear stuff like that, because it wasn't, obviously before you guys were here, that didn't happen.
No, Iowa State wasn't even on the map. I think if you were in Texas and you said Iowa State, they would, Iowa State, Wyoming, North Dakota State, it's all sort of the same to them. Now the first thing they say is, "You guys got a good football program up there." Like, they know. And that's what we were trying to build with those extremely hard lifting and running days in 96, 97, 98, is that when we were, now 46 years old, that people, when they thought of the schools the university that we all went to, they would, in their minds, have a lot of respect for our school, for Iowa State. And that's exactly what's happening.
Well, Sage, this has been a marathon, and I apologize about that. And I got one more question before I let you go, and I can't thank you enough for joining us on our CyCast. I've obviously followed, Coach McCarney, and I was blessed to be here when he turned the program around. And the one thing that's been so, I guess, really cool and neat to watch is, as you guys have grown older, how tight you are, and the bond that you guys have, not only for just yourselves and teammates, but with what you have with Coach McCarney. And can you just tell us, like, how proud that makes you feel that you guys stick together still to this day?
I played in the NFL for 11 years, and we talked about. I have friends that I played with that I still talk to this day. I can't say that I'm as close to anybody in those years as I am to the guys that I came into Iowa State with as freshmen. And I think bonds and relationships are built through a lot of things. And at Iowa State, the hard work that we put into and the sacrifices that we made and the grit that it took for everybody on the team to try to become the best football player possible at like the cellular level for us to be successful in 2000. You can't remake that in pro football. You can't I don't think you can make that in the business world. I think it's football is a special place in society where you're bringing kids from every corner of the country and sometimes internationally to go there, to go to a place and work really, really, really hard for this goal. And when that time is done, those hours of hard work and dedication builds really, really, really tight bonds that extend well past graduation and whatever people do, after college. And I think that's what's occurred with our class. And it's almost like an unspoken language. And I think there's, whether you have religious differences or political differences, right? There's a respect there that, my teammates know what I'm all about and I know what they're all about because we were there, we were doing it, and we did do it. We got it done. And, those deep friendships are, I think, based off of not just good times and going to the bars. It's based off of the 6 a.m. grueling workouts and those locker rooms where the focus has to be so deep and so personal that those bonds then end up being really strong for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Sage, thank you so much. It's been a blast. I'm sorry it took too long.
No problem. Listen. I'm quasi-retired, so I don't have a ton of things to do anyway. It's all right.
But you're the best, and I really appreciate you joining us on this CyCast.
Thanks for having me on, Beener.